welcome to the third and final webinar broadcast for our very expectations group. And I am excited that we're going to do here. Pull it up. Yeah. All right. Just going to minimize this window here. There we go. All right. All right, so there's been a lot of things that I've learned in doing this, and a lot of things that I'm sure I'm going to continue to learn as I go through this process. And this particular webinar, we've talked a lot about the relationship with the self and the importance of having that relationship with oneself. And I think that I've hammered that point home quite a bit. And I think a lot of us actually want to figure out, how do we apply this stuff to our relationships now? How do I actually start having a more productive or a more a happier relationship with my spouse or with my children or with whoever it is? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the questions that you guys have asked in the very beginning, and we're going to address those questions one by one. And I think we'll start with the questions about our relationships with our children. There's not really a whole lot to cover here. Natasha asked a question about how do you help your young children navigate their relationships while being allowed the space to be themselves, specifically their relationships with siblings. And when I asked her to elaborate on that, she said, I have a very intense, spirited 5-year-old, and this means that oftentimes she communicates by screaming. As an adult, I can find a way to meet her where she is with it, but with another young child, this can be very intimidating, scary, or unnerving. She has big, powerful emotions. They come on quick. Sometimes it is hard to get my bearings with it, let alone help her get hers. I understand where you're coming from. As a parent, I have beautiful kids, as you do, and they're actually wonderful kids. But they have, their behavior issues and their characteristics and whatnot. Allowing our children just to be who they are is something that we, as parents, we do surprisingly little of, astonishingly little of. And the truth is that if we really understand, well, ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to an expanded understanding of our sense of self. That's what all transformation is about. That's why, I've made the first 2 webinars primarily about that subject. Is getting familiar with who you are really, what you are really at your core, and understanding that really puts a lot of other things in perspective. And one of them is, who are our children and who are we? And we identify as parents It's just an office. It's just a role that we play. It's just something that we happen to be the channel through which they came into the world. But as Khalil Gibran says it in his book, I don't even know if I'm saying his name right, but the book is beautiful, The Prophet, and anybody who wants to really understand conscious relationships would do well to actually read that book. It's like the Bible, only better. And he says your children are not your children. They come through you, but not from you. And they are the children of life's longing for itself. You can give them your uh, love, but don't give them their thoughts because they have their own thoughts, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. The point is that we are, quite strictly speaking, we are no more or less connected to our children than we are to our neighbor or to anybody else in this world. And there's no reason for us to love our children more or less than anybody else, especially if we understand what love is. Now, of course, we have that emotional connection to the children. We have that bonding with the children. Um, and although we can say, well, I'm not their father, well, that's the role that I took on. Um, I didn't have to take on that role. I didn't realize this. But I didn't have to take on that role. And realizing that I had the choice to not be their father really allowed me to release a lot of stories and a lot of identity crap that I was carrying around with me. So um, maybe in the course of dealing with our children, let's just remember that we don't deal with our children any differently than any other human being. That's the essence of what I'm trying to say. Don't treat them any different than anybody else. Don't talk to them any different than anybody else. We don't have anything to teach our children. It's not our job to teach them. It's not our job to give them our thoughts. So, how do you help your young children navigate their relationships while being allowed the space to be themselves? It sounds like what you're concerned about, Natasha, is I've got this child who freaks the hell out sometimes, and it scares, intimidates, and unnerves this child, the younger child, and I'm concerned about this child not being affected by that child. Um, if it was not your child, if it was the neighbor, how would you deal with it? How would you approach this situation? Would you still be feeling the ownership or the need to somehow shape your child's experience in life? When I realized that I had created all kinds of stories that turned into baggage for me in my life. And I realized how those stories got created, and that they were created in my youth and my childhood because of interactions that I had with my parents. I started to realize that things that I was doing were creating stories in the life of my son. And of course, the natural response was to want to shape those, to somehow modify my behavior, and somehow modify his interpretation of my behavior, and somehow fix myself so that I could make sure that he didn't have the trauma that I had. I had to learn how to allow him to have his experience. Because even when we're trying to give them the optimal experience in life, we are still trying to shape their experience. And we wouldn't do that with somebody else. When we do that with somebody else, it's meddling. So if if it were my children, I see this all the time. Kalen, he's 6 and Joey's 3, and Kalen loves to scare the shit out of Joey. Now, there are boundaries that I have to help him realize. Hey, when you do this, it creates this for your sister. Take that into consideration, right? But they get to work out their relationship with each other, and I get to respect that. And if it sounds like way too much of a hands-off approach, I mean, all I can say is that the results speak for themselves. Because ever since I realized that my only job as a parent was to work on myself, then everything transformed after that. When I healed the relationship with my father, and I finally experienced his love and his acceptance for me 18 years after he was dead, the remarkable thing about that is that on that very same night, the first night that I came home after that healing took place, my son came and he crawled into bed with me for the first time since he was a baby, and cuddled with me. And I had done nothing, consciously on the relationship with him. It was all about the relationship with myself, and how I had taken those stories that I created around my father and untangled those. Right? And when I saw that, it really turned on the light bulb for me and made me realize this is not about him. He is here having his experience. I get to keep him safe. I get to teach him the things that will keep him safe physically. And you as a parent, you get to decide where those limits are, right? Do you let him play with knives or not? Do you let him touch the fire or not? I like to give him the chance to experience for himself, put his hand in the fire so that he can experience that it's hot. And then he doesn't go near the fire anymore. When he had that experience with me there, then I can keep him safe. But trying to protect our children from life is where we really set them up for failure, in my opinion. We cannot protect them from life. And if we do, it's like building a fence around a little baby tree, protecting it from the wind, and then one day taking the fence down, and suddenly this tree is being buffeted by the wind and has no root system, no experience. All the branches break off the first time that there's a hurricane comes by. So um, my whole philosophy with children just boils down to let them be who they are. Um, if that's difficult, then a lot of times it has to do with something that's going on inside of ourselves. What is it that I am trying to protect them from? I don't think I have anything else to add to that, so hopefully that helps. Um, I am going to go straight into the fun stuff. And we're just going to go through what I've done is I've taken you guys' questions and I'm going to read through those and just address those one by one. I think this is going to be a relatively short webinar. So that will be good because the other two were excessively long in my opinion. That's something that is going to change. Asia said, way back when, he said that something that came up for him was this romanticized idea that we have of love in Western culture, romantic love. And recently for me in dealing with some heartache I was having associated with a lover who moved away, it was bringing to the surface some of my underlying conceptions about what love actually is. Definitely want to learn more about an integrated and interdependent, intimate, long-term relationship. This is something that I want. Yes. Love is, as we've discussed on several occasions, is not this affection, and it's not this romantic, hey, I need you to come sweep me off my feet. And this is where we really get confused in our culture, this romanticized love that you're talking about there. I absolutely agree. There is a difference, and we talked about this in the very beginning, a difference between codependent, independent, and interdependent. And the way that that I would define those is like this. Codependency is a relationship that basically says, I need you. I need you to feel complete. I need you to take care of these needs, whatever it is, I need you. And independent relationship is, of course, a relationship where it's, I don't need you. I care less. Right? And I think that sometimes we confuse that for the ideal, but I think that it is really just a the other side of the coin from codependency. It's that extreme stance of saying, I don't need anybody. I can take care of myself. You know? So what is interdependent? Because that seems to be the ideal, right? Interdependent for me, in essence, is a relationship where we understand that I am you. Transformation happens through expanding our sense of self. It's what all of this is about. Every transformational program, every experience, an ayahuasca experience, a Tony Robbins experience, it doesn't matter what you do to transform your life. At the core of that experience is going to be something that shifts or redefines your sense of self, what you believe yourself to be. And typically, what we're talking about is expanding our sense of self, expanding it to include more of the world around us. The suffering that we experience in life comes from our sense of separation. All of the crap that we see going on in the world around us, war and GMOs and destruction of the rainforest and child slavery and all of all of these things all stem from a misaligned sense of self, from not understanding the truth about who we are, from thinking that we are separate from nature, from the world, from the universe. And what we're starting to wake up to, of course, is that we're not, right? So expanding that sense of self to realize that this perception of separation between self and other is a complete illusion. That is what we're moving towards. That's what a conscious relationship consists of, is an expanded awareness, an expanded consciousness. That is why I would say that an interdependent relationship, a conscious relationship, is one in which we realize I am you. And I am willing to let go of the needs and the expectations and all of these things, because I realize that all of those things are of no service to either of us. So that, for me, is the definition of codependency, independency, and interdependency. I invite you to examine that for yourself and come up with your own definition and see if it's somehow different. So how do we apply these things? Lauren asked, how does one stay flexible while not being a pushover, or showing up peacefully without giving up oneself for peace? How do we set our boundaries? I think it's basically the question that you're asking, Lauren. How do we set our boundaries? I think we have to know what our needs are, what our true needs are, and why we have them. And we have to be able to communicate those effectively and with ownership of what's ours, and with zero sense of blame in the relationship. So, for example, if I'm in a relationship and something is being done that is disrespectful or not sensitive to my needs, I think the first step is to really get clear on what are my needs and why do I have those needs. Are those really needs that I need to have in my life? Is this something where my pride is being stepped on? Is it something where my insecurities are being stepped on? Or is it something where I'm just simply not being properly respected, the respect and appreciation that I deserve, and I need to set boundaries and say, hey, this is not acceptable. This is not the kind of interaction that I want to accept in my life. And The key is to be able to communicate those things in using holistic language. Yeah? So taking ownership, first of all, speaking truthfully, holistically, in other words, speaking with complete integrity. That means that we are not, that we're not, it means that we're speaking in a way that is not arguable. That you're not saying, well, you always do this. What does always mean? They don't always do that. But if you say, on this occasion, this happened, and you're speaking strictly in facts, right? You're separating the story that you make it mean from the facts, and you're saying this happened at this time or in this way. Those are the facts, and they have to be inarguable facts. And then you're also not saying you made me do this, but you're saying I felt this. Right? That's also something that they cannot argue with. And it's not accusatory. So you're observing the facts. This, by the way, is nonviolent communication. You're observing the facts. You are expressing how they made you feel. Right? You are identifying, after that, you identify the need that you have. And then you are inviting them to come to an understanding with you to create a different result in the future. Notice that it's an invitation. So you have to be prepared to accept the fact that they may say, no, I do not choose to change my behavior. In which case you may have to say, well, in that case, I choose that this relationship is modified in this and this way. It just requires us to have consciousness in our communication and ownership and awareness in what we're doing and what we're saying. Does that make sense? Hope it does. Some people say to never compromise. What does that mean? I think this kind of goes along the same lines. Some people insist that compromise is necessary in relationships, and I am of the opinion that in a conscious relationship, a healthy relationship, it is not. But I think we should also quantify exactly what compromise is. The dictionary definition that I found was compromise is the expedient acceptance of standards that are lower than desirable. So I think that compromise is necessary when you have a relationship that's founded on codependency, because in codependency there's bargaining and there's creating conditions in order to find some level of stasis or status quo. Yeah? It means that you have to give up one or more of your expectations in order to have other expectations fulfilled. And that is why I really believe that compromise has no place in a healthy relationship. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. So the next question was from Andreas, and he said, the question that interests me right now the most stemmed from being in a relationship where my partner is polyamorous, meaning that she holds the belief that sexual and relational exclusivity are not necessary for deep, committed, long-term loving relationships, and she consequently also has several relationships besides the one to me whereas the one to me is the most intense one. Um, I'll just interject real quick here. I share the same belief with your partner. I'm not saying that that's what I practice. I'm saying that I believe this to be true. I don't think that exclusivity is necessary in order for there to be committed, long-term, loving relationships. I don't think it's necessary, but it's also not quite as simple as all of that. Um, in polyamory, healthy polyamory is something that requires a level of consciousness that is way beyond the scope of most people. And most people who want to practice what you want to practice, polyamory, are I don't want to say not qualified for it, because I think that's for everybody to figure out for themselves. You know, go have whatever sexual relationship that you want to have. I don't think there's anything wrong with having polyamorous relationships. I do think that that one should that it's important to separate and be careful about justifying polyamorous relationships on the basis of spiritual development. So I think that happens sometimes. The people that are going into polyamory, if you really, really are going to go in and take that apart, really go into self-examination and self-realization and being confronted with yourself, there are some really, really, really heavy stuff that you're going to have to go through. So, is polyamory the way to go or not the way to go? I think all of it's fine. Well, it's just me. I think everybody gets to figure out for themselves what works, what doesn't. And if you want to be in a polyamorous relationship, and you're willing to actually, own your stuff, then I think it would be absolutely I think that it has the potential to really, really help a person to go deep. But you got to be willing to have your heart ripped out of your chest. So that's my thoughts on polyamory. One of the things that he asked is, what are the sources of feelings of jealousy? Is it the fear of losing my partner, or is it not being good enough to satisfy her? And is that even a reasonable goal of a relationship, to satisfy each other's needs exclusively? And he said, would it not be much better to overcome the fears of losing each other anyway and find trust in the commitment that the other shows? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What are the source of feelings of jealousy? Is it the fear of losing my partner? Is it not being good enough to satisfy her? Yeah, I think it's all of that stuff. I'm just looking back on things in my own past, my own history, and things that I had to deal with. And yeah, there's definitely that element of I'm not good enough, or you know, possessiveness, or somehow her being with me somehow makes me important, whatever. I don't know. What where where does all that crap come from? Um, and then he goes on to say, how transparent should my partner be towards me? Does she have to report whenever she spends time with one of the other persons, and does she have to tell me exactly what happened? And why is it that in our society exclusivity in regards to sex is regarded so much higher than exclusivity of talking about deep feelings from the bottom of our heart? Are the two really so different? Yeah, it's a powerful point. Um, I believe in complete transparency. And I believe that that is one of the core elements of having a healthy conscious relationship. Complete transparency. You know, what that means is something that I think a person should work out in a conversation with their partner. But I think that if if you're in a polyamorous relationship and you cannot say to the other person, if there's some part of you that does not want to tell the other person, I mean, it's not something where you necessarily want to tell all the sordid details of everything that happened, but say, yeah, I was with this person, and this happened before, we were intimate for whatever. Um, that hesitancy would be a trigger for me to realize that there's something I need to look at. Something. Why is it that I don't want to be straightforward and forthcoming? And on the flip side of that, if I don't want to hear that, or if I feel like I need to know everything, maybe there's elements of control there, or maybe there's elements of fear, whatever. So I don't know. I think polyamory is a really, really gnarly animal to bite into. Um, I mean, to be really honest, I mean, in my relationship, you know, Sandra and I we split up last year, and we went through this really rough phase, and it was like, I'm not sure that I love you anymore, and I don't want to be together, and neither do I, and all that kind of stuff. We split up and living apart, and we said we're going to split up for 6 months, and we're going to get back together for a date and see how we feel about it after 6 months. And then after 6 months, we got back together, and she said, well, I'm actually kind of liking living alone, and I said, I'm kind of liking living alone too. you know. So we left it at that. We were still both going through a lot of our stuff and processing a lot of heavy trauma and whatnot, and so that was something that uh, the agreement that we came to is, look, we have two beautiful children together, and no matter what else happens, we're always going to be a family. And so anybody that comes into our life or our relationships, either on my side or on her side, has to understand and accept that we're going to, we've always been best of friends and really closely connected and whatever. But we were separated. And so over the course of the last 6 months, as a lot of our stuff fell away and the stories came apart, and we had really gotten good at allowing each other just to be and be who we are. And we realized that, that attraction is still there. You know, love is still there, and closeness, um, and yet at the same time, you know, and now we're living together. But the conversation that we had, and I told her, I said, look, you know, I don't want to get back into a committed, exclusive relationship. I want to go back to that. And having, you know, honest conversations about that and making really clear about, you know, what exactly it is that we're doing. Basically, people ask us all the time, "Are you guys back together?" And we say, "No, but we were never really apart." You know, it's like we're not together, we're not separated, we just are. That's the way it is right now. So, and I'm not out having relationships with other women. I don't want to. I have no interest in it. Pretty, pretty happy with where our relationships are. Your relationship can look like whatever the hell you want it to look like, as long as you have uh, somebody who you've had an open and honest conversation with, and you're practicing the principles of conscious relationships. In my opinion, the time for fitting things into a box is disappearing real quick. You get to decide what your box looks like, but you need to have thorough, honest, really, really honest conversations about it. You need to be really clear where you stand with each other. So, um, yeah, let's see. When, where are we? Where are we? Question from Maya. This was at the beginning of the group when we first started the group. So you may be a little bit further beyond all of this, but we're still going to talk about this question, Maya. Said, I have been learning about levels of consciousness. I would say that has been a huge factor that has contributed to not finding partners that I felt that I could create an intimate relationship with. I personally have been going through a sort of midlife crisis where I'm not so clear anymore what my next steps and direction are. And this has sapped my self-confidence, which has contributed to a deep depression that's making it hard to feel like having a relationship with anybody, friend, lover, or otherwise right now. I'm not sure if anyone else in this group is at my stage to relate to this, but crisis and transition comes in many forms and many ages of life. I'm looking back at what got in the way or made it difficult for partners and I to communicate or understand each other. And I have felt like I could find very few people who could understand or relate to my perspective and the meaning that I placed on my experience. So I think as I try and summarize that, I think it sounds like the question is one of you know, how do you find someone who's on the same page as you, basically? Um, I do believe that a certain amount of congruency is necessary in a relationship. And yeah, I think there's a certain amount of compatibility that has to happen. But there's a couple things I would take into consideration on this. One of them is, why do we need to be understood? Why do we need to be related to? What does that mean? What's going on there? when we really get clear and secure in who we are, what we're doing, why we're here, what is that need, that need will fall away. It falls away with the realization of who you are and getting firmly grounded in your being, in your essence, and allowing that to be what fills your heart. Yeah. So um, I think, there's a few basic elements that should exist when we're looking at partners. I mean, am I attracted to this person? Both sexually and emotionally or personality wise. Do I love this person, and can I accept them exactly as they are without any need to try to change them or for them to change? If not, if you don't feel like you can accept them exactly as they are, um, I, I think that we have to examine whether or not we're willing to learn how to do that in that relationship. In other words, learn how to accept them where they are. And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. We don't have to stay with someone just because spirituality says that you should be equanimous and accepting and that you should have no uh, you know desires or whatever. If you resonate with that person, if it feels good to be with that person, be around that person, be around that person. If who they are, their essence, the way they show up in life, is something that you want to be around, then be around it. I think we make this shit way too complicated, way more complicated than it has to be. You know, um, the law of attraction, not something that I really, I think that it's extremely misunderstood, and I think that it's inaccurately expressed, the law of attraction. But I think that if there were a place for the law of attraction, it would be in relationships. And I think that nowhere is it more true and more constant than in the realm of intimate relationships. What I mean is that whatever is showing up for us in our relationships is in some way a reflection of what we are putting out. And I think that that's actually the core of the dilemma that Maya is expressing here. She says that um, she is going through this midlife crisis, not so clear anymore what the next steps in direction are, and it's contributing to a deep depression. Yeah, that's what's being put out. Not being clear on the next steps in the direction in life is a direct result of not being clear on who and what we are, and that creates the fog. This is, it's being connected with our essence. And so when we get clear on that, one of the key elements of these conscious relationships is, we have to commit to our own path. A conscious relationship is a path of self-realization. Self-realization. It is all about being on your path and committing to expressing your most authentic being. And if that's only possible under certain conditions, then it's not your most authentic being. if it's only possible when you have the right partner, or if it's only possible when certain needs are met, or whatever. So, um, in trying to find the ideal partner, if that is the stage where you're at in life, I know that some people create like vision boards of the ideal partner, and what he looks like and what kind of things that he does. And in fact, that's one of the things that Lauren asked. She said, "What are expectations? Is it a negative thing to say the next guy I commit to will show up in these ways? For example, buy me flowers, be thoughtful and romantic. Is it codependent to want someone to be romantic in a relationship or to sweep me off my feet?" Yes. Yeah, you're asking me. I say yeah. It's much simpler than that. When you are you and you are in your power and you're connected to your most authentic being, it is not going to matter to you if you're understood. It's not going to matter to you if you have a partner who understands the level of consciousness you're at. It's not even going to matter to you if you have a partner or not. And when you're in that space and you're connected to the truth about who you are, everything is in there. Everything is in here. None of it is out there. That's why I say that the law of attraction is this misunderstood, misapplied, or whatever, because it's not about attracting something. Attracting it means that in some way it's outside of you, and none of it is. See, I mean, it's understandable to want to be swept off your feet, and it's understandable to say, "Well, I think the guy should be romantic, and I want a partner that shows up this way." What you want is you want to have joy in your life. You want to have a wonderful relationship. You want to have happiness and peace and contentment. That's what you want. And you think that it's going to come to you in this form or that form. And that's not how it comes to us. So um, if you are in that space yourself and you're open to it and you put it out there, he or she is going to appear. And you're going to know that it's he or she, not because it conforms to some pre-established list of expectations that you created for your partner. It's going to be because you set the expectations aside and you finally have the ears to hear. What I mean by that is expectations only create noise. That's all they are, is that expectations are noise. And when we finally set those aside, when we stop going through life, and this is true of everything, not just your attracting the perfect partner, but everything in life. When we set aside expectations and that little voice inside that's always saying, should be this way, it shouldn't be this way. This is, I want this, I don't want that. And we learn to just let it go and let it be and accept each moment and each part of life exactly the way it is. The more we can do that, the quieter it becomes. And when it gets quiet, we can hear the voice. And there's a voice. It's always been there. A still small voice, my mama used to call it. And that voice has always been there. And um, the thing about being on this path, being on the way, is that what you are in love with, what you fall in love with, is the beloved itself. What the poet Rumi calls the beloved. That's what you fall in love with. And you fall in love with mystery, right? And so you're going to recognize it when it shows up in the other. That's what being swept off your feet should feel like. You know that space because you found it in yourself. And so you know when it's being resonated, reflected back to you in somebody else. And you connect with that person. And you have fun with them. And the sex will be great. And the relationship will be awesome. And you will have the freedom to be yourself because you give that freedom to yourself already. So true romance, in my opinion, consists of two people who completely accept and allow and support each other in the truest expression of their being. That's what romance is. So, I'm going to wrap this up here. I've got a question here by Bob. Bob asked this question. He said, why are intimate relationships so difficult to unravel from the way that it was unconsciously created into a conscious, powerful, empowering one? I'll read it again. Why are intimate relationships so difficult to unravel from the way that it was unconsciously created into a conscious, powerful, empowering one? The answer to that, Bob, is because we make it difficult. That's why. It's really simple. We tell ourselves that it's difficult, and then it's difficult. Take the question that you asked, for example, and just break it down for a second. The question that you asked is a reflection of the conversation that we have with our subconscious. Right? Your subconscious is like a little kid with really, really big frickin' muscles. Okay? It will do whatever it hears you tell it to do. And it will answer whatever question you ask it. Have you ever asked a little kid? I ask Joey all the time. I'll ask her a question. And sometimes I notice that she gets this look kind of like a deer caught in the headlights. And then she'll come up with some off the wall answer to the question that I asked her. And I realized that the reason why is because she didn't know any other way to answer the question. And she didn't know that it was a stupid question to be asking her. And your subconscious doesn't know that either. Your subconscious doesn't go, how actually, what's the practical use of asking myself a question like, why is it so difficult? Your subconscious just says, well, the reason why it's so difficult is because this. And then it's difficult. Right? The conversations that we have with ourselves are why life is difficult, you know? So I think that the question that you meant to be asking here was, how can I unravel my intimate relationship from the unconscious mess that I once created and transform it into a conscious, powerful, empowering one? I think that's the question that you wanted to ask. And the answer is to do what you're already doing. Right? So you take 100% ownership and 0% blame. You face your fears. You learn how to accept the world and everything in it exactly the way that it is. You commit yourself to your own path of development and self-realization. You get clear on what you really want and the reasons why. You commit yourself to the fullest expression of your being, and you make that your highest priority. Okay? That is how we begin. Now, how do you put these principles into action in our intimate relationships? These are the things that you want to put into practice in your intimate relationships. Number one, you learn how to communicate your needs with trust, ownership, and 0% blame, right? And also, as we talked about before, without arguability. So you learn how to communicate, period. You maintain integrity and you honor your word. If you said that you would do something, then you do it. If you have an agreement with your spouse or with your significant other to be uh, to show up a certain way, then do it. And if you can't, or if that no longer suits uh, where you're at in life, then have the conversation that needs to be had, the difficult one, and get yourself into a space where you can have integrity. You can have integrity uh, with who you are. And then you learn how to listen. You learn how to listen without judgment, without defensiveness, and without intent to respond. You take ownership of what is yours, and you allow other people to have their experience by letting them take ownership of what is theirs. And this is a critical one. And this is probably one of the ones where uh, most people get stuck as they're trying to untangle their relationships. Um, you're probably taking ownership of shit that's not yours. And that's something that it takes a while to sort out, and it takes a while to really get conscious and clear of, why do you feel responsible for certain things? And it goes back to the conversation we had in the very beginning about children. We take ownership of stuff that is not ours to take ownership of with our children. And we deny them their experience of life in doing so. So that's a key one in my opinion. You you drop expectations, you give up being right, and you start practicing holding the space of being for others. Those are some things that we've worked on in the group. You learn how to tell the unvarnished truth with complete transparency. Tell the truth, the whole truth, all of the truth to your partner, to whoever it is you're in that relationship with. And don't put lipstick on the pig. This means, tell them the truth about the things that you think that they might not even like. Things about yourself that you never told anybody. Um, Things, desires that you have, fantasies that you've had in the bedroom that you never told them because you thought that it would gross them out. I don't know what kind of fantasies you have. Jeez. But tell the truth. Tell the whole truth and be completely transparent. There's a lot of freedom in that. And you have to face fears when you do that. You have to face the fear that, oh my God, they might not like this. And they might not. You might lose your partner over it. But if that's the price that you have to pay to be authentic and to uncover your truest self and to allow yourself the freedom to be, eventually you'll find that it was worth the price. And the final part, and probably the most important part, is commit yourself to enjoying that relationship. And enjoying life. Just enjoy life. If you find yourself not enjoying life, a pretty good chance that you might be doing something unproductive. Let's put it that way. Now, it's true that, you might be going through a painful experience or whatever. We have painful experiences, in life, and I've said it before that I don't think that life is all about being happy. That's not what I mean. Happiness and joy are not necessarily the same thing. And you don't always enjoy pain, but you can appreciate it, you can accept it, you can allow it to be present in your life. And through that, we experience the joy, because joy and pain are just two sides of the same coin. So with that, I am wrapping it up. I would invite you to ask questions, but let's see. Well, oh my gosh, there are actually a couple of you that made it to watch. So for the rest of you, you're probably going to be watching this after the fact, because because I didn't announce it quite as frequently as I did the first two webinars. But that's okay. If anybody has any questions and you want to ask any questions, you are welcome to ask them. I will give you 2 minutes. There's a comment here from Bob. Hey, Bob. Negotiating is not the same as compromise. I think that it depends on the definition that you're using for compromise. I think that most compromise that happens in relationships is really just negotiating and bargaining and putting conditions on things. I do think that that there are definitely elements of what might be called compromise, but ultimately it's important in my opinion to get clear on what it is that we're compromising on. Because the one thing that we should never compromise on is the fullest expression of our being. That's our relationship with God, if you want to look at it that way. So I don't know, negotiating is not the same as compromise. Yeah, I think it just depends on feel like it just depends on what what it is that we're compromising on. Hope that helps. Thanks for coming to watch. And let's see. Anybody else have any questions? Want to share? Because I think we're going to wrap it up. Oh, Maya, what about boundaries? How do you know which are based on healthy self-care and which are based on trying to control your partner or letting them control you? Or should we have no boundaries? I definitely think we should have boundaries. We need boundaries. Um, at the same time, I think you know we have to be really clear on why we have those boundaries, right? What is it that we're putting the boundaries on? The boundaries are on um, expectations, in my opinion. Putting an expectation on another person um, is one thing, and putting, setting boundaries and saying, I am not going to um, be compelled to fit in a box. I'm not going to be compelled to modify my being to satisfy somebody else's expectations. Those are boundaries that I think we need to set for ourselves. And that's the difference, I think, between healthy and unhealthy boundaries. That question that Lauren asked about where do we find the balance between being peaceful and giving ourselves up for peace? And that's where it is letting go of expectations is where we erase the boundaries that we create, the barriers that separate us from having love and affection and those things in our relationships. But also having the integrity of our own inner being to be able to say, I'm not going to take on these expectations. I'm not going to, and it's not this thing of, I'm not going to let you control me. I'm not, we start to project blame on the other person because they're putting these expectations on us. I'm setting these boundaries for myself. I'm not going to feel like I have to conform to that. They get to show up how they want. Now I can say if they're, in my face or nagging me about something or just, crossing crossing my personal bubble, then I get to say, hey, uh, take your your pony show and move it over that way a little bit, will you please? Right? Somebody comes up and starts straightening my necktie, and I didn't ask them to, and I don't want them to, then I need to have a conversation with them about that. Okay? But other than that, I think any other boundaries that we start creating in relationships are boundaries of control. Yeah. With that, I do want to keep this webinar shorter than previous webinars. Otherwise, nobody in this busy 21st century has time to watch them. So thank you guys for joining me, and hope that was helpful, useful, and appreciate you. Have a good night.